Real quick, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of this podcast, Greenlight.ai. We all know how important compliance is, and Greenlight.ai is the leader for compliance and EOR services, especially for talent platforms. You're going to hear about them later, but thank you to Greenlight. Sandra, this is, as we mentioned, years in the making. Can you guess what question I really want to ask you first? I'll give you one hint. It actually has nothing related to the future of work. So
why is it we never met earlier?
That's a good one. Maybe I should ask that question. But you know what I would have asked, even if we met 5 years ago, is your background related to biochemistry and politics. I just can't wait to hear how in the world we went from biochemistry to future of work. You want to hit that question first? Because for you listeners out there, and we're not talking like watched a YouTube video. We're talking Michigan State and Cambridge level biochem. Give us the background, Sandra. That is so cool.
Well, I'm one of those accidental business people. I did not know very much about professional services or about business. I was really the second person in my entire family to go to college. And my dad was the first person, and he became a professor of chemistry. So anyhow, I was going to be a scientist and was well on that track. Doing a graduate work at the University of Cambridge, as you said, Trinity College in biochemistry, when I realized I hated wet bench science. I really liked the science, but I didn't like doing it. Turns out I also don't like cooking. So maybe there's a correlation. But I was very, very fortunate to be recruited cold turkey by McKinsey in the first year that they started to look at non-traditional hires. And so I became a McKinsey management consultant without knowing a thing about management consulting and not ever heard the term McKinsey before. And that all happened because one of the senior partners at McKinsey had been a physicist in Ireland before he went to HBS. And he said, let me just be really clear that the PhD in physics was harder than the MBA from Harvard. So that's how we started.
So funny. So, and actually looking back now, is it harder than business? Which is harder, and what are the parallels?
Well, I don't think it's a question of harder or easier, but what I will say is that I do believe that the foundation of like the scientific method is very correlated with management consulting, because it's about structuring a problem, being hypothesis driven, using lots of data, being objective about the data and the results, and then synthesizing kind of the so whats. And if, in a nutshell, that is the process of management consulting, a disciplined problem solving effort. So anyhow, at the beginning, it mattered that I knew a difference between a virus and a bacteria. And I did a lot of early management consulting for biotech companies and life sciences companies more broadly. But I expanded out of that well in the 90s, and ever since I've been really a much more of a generalist. I think the thing that surprised me along the way is that I actually became an entrepreneur. I hadn't really thought about that. And Matt, the only thing, you and I were talking about skiing before, the only clue that I had that I was going to be an entrepreneur was that by the time I was about 8 years old in Michigan, I was harvesting icicles off my garage, storing them in my mother's deep freeze, and then reselling them to my friends in the summer. So that was a nice little side business when I was in elementary school.
That is an incredible fun fact. Now, did you have like a brand? Was there like flavors of these? And by the way, my wife would have bought all of them. So she's obsessed with Icy Pops, but yeah.
No, I wish I could say that, but there was something about the taste of asphalt roof tiles that kids loved.
That is so, maybe your most popular flavor was lead pipe. You just didn't tell them.
Lead piping. No, we shouldn't joke about this.
That is so funny. Well, I'm going to bring you to a family function because my 3 sister-in-laws are all doctors. And so you can talk about viruses. They can talk about the heart, the head, the teeth. And I'll just go eat all the food.
Okay, so there you go. Let's do it.
But so tying in, and here's another incredible thing. You're approaching almost 20 years at BTG, right? Like, tell us about the experience of early days now. Like, boy, are you a wealth of information. And for you listeners out there, you obviously know, but BTG is the leading consulting, executive recruiting when talking about the independent workforce. I mean, you've been one of the leaders now since as early as 2012, Sandra, or
Oh
give us the
no,
full
since
rundown.
2006. So, just a quick, more serious kind of up a story about this, because a theme has emerged in my professional journey, which I think is paralleled in the business environment more broadly. So, I left McKinsey after 8 years in 1996. And I became an independent management consultant before we had the term gig economy or freelancers. And I became that because of personal reasons where I just couldn't travel anymore as a management consultant. And so I set up a deal with a number of my colleagues at McKinsey that if they had client needs that were too small for McKinsey, they should send them to me. And so for 10 years, I did that work as a freelancer before I knew I was a freelancer. And in 2005, late 2005, I met the founder of Business Talent Group and I joined the team. There were three of us when we started the company in 2006. And the idea was that we were going to build a business that helped unleash demand for the growing number of freelancers, high-end independent business professionals out there in the world. And that would create demand that served the community that we were all part of being freelancers, but also was going to be good for business in terms of bringing agility and new solutions to leaders and companies. So it's funny that I started out that way. And I know, Matt, you're a freelancer and you describe yourself as your career eats its own tail or something like that, where you are a freelancer and you focus on freelancers. And in a weird way, I'm a parallel of that, focusing on getting freelancers essentially more opportunity in the world and becoming more and more convinced that the real motivation for this segment to grow is not the supply of freelancers. It is the actual needs of business today.
Yeah. Which, let me double click on that. So this is the funny part is, some episodes it'll take 25 minutes to get to here, and we did it in about 30 seconds. But so, you start off as the independent consultant, you see how powerful this is. And I want to call it a really important point, Sandra, which is you didn't show up and say like, hey, we're better than McKinsey, right? You showed up and you were like, hey, there's this segment of value that you're not capturing that I can capture, which I think parallels a lot of the best platforms like yours, that they don't exactly come out and say, hey, we're better than everyone. They say, oh, no, technology's enabled a new, aspect of client demand that we can now serve. But so let's double click on this demand. Bring us into the world of 2006, the world of your independent consulting. And I think we're going to get to a place of where do we stand today? Where will we be tomorrow? But let me double click on when you say this demand. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, and I might jump to the end and work a little bit backwards. But in 2006, right, it was pretty focused on management consulting and problem solving. Okay. And so it was a smaller scale solution, often using very highly experienced and expert consultants, but without a full team. And we all know that the traditional model of management consulting, has a lot of leverage in it and a lot of associates and analysts cranking out data. And we would talk about more of a vertically integrated consultant where they could be the partner level person talking with the board or the CEO, but also doing the analysis themselves and, working in smaller molecules. Sorry, I always get to use a science word when I can. Smaller molecules instead of bigger teams. So it was a scale solution, and it was also a little bit of a unbundling so that you could get more of the senior person more of the time. And that had a lot of appeal as well. So over the years, and I'm going to jump for a minute and we can come back and talk about it. As we grew the business, by 2019, we were in a strategic partnership with Heidrick Struggles. And this has been an incredibly important part of the evolution of my career, but also of the space. Because of course, if you're working with one of the world's best recruiter, the world's best executive search team, the immediate adjacency to that is interim executives. And so we had already started providing interim executives and not just management consultants along the way. Where I think we are now, and I know we'll come back to this, is the combination of management consultants to interim executives, they're blending together in kind of a future state of what I like to call leadership liquidity, which is needed for both initiatives and corporate priorities, companies of all sides, simply to handle today's world. So I'll pause there because we'll come back to that.
Interesting. So, okay, I'm going to double click on leadership liquidity. And I'm also going to double click on why companies need this right now. And I'll kind of give a little bit of context. So I remember my first experience was as early as 2012 being on the individual side. And what opened my eyes was the level of accountability and direct relationship with the client I fell in love with. So that was me from like the individual side. Then in 2016, I was early at Gigster, which was custom software dev through a massive flexible talent network. And I fell in love with the speed and the quality of what could happen if you had, a $10 million custom software build through this freelance network versus the traditional. Then here's where it gets murky. Now at Microsoft, it then turned into so many different reasons. And sometimes it was just cost, right? Sometimes it was as simple as, well, this is 50% cheaper. Other times it was access, which even at a place like Microsoft, you can't access the world's talent. You still need to go through these, alternative networks. But what are you seeing right now? What are these companies really screaming at you for?
So, let's dig in because there's a few that are very obvious, and then I think there's one that's more permanent. So the obvious things that jump out right away in 2025 is that the world is full of unexpected change. And I don't know a single company in any industry that is saying, you know what, the plan that we had to execute at the top of this year is exactly what we're executing now. We have had 90-degree pivots. We have had things totally freeze up as a result of policy change at a macro level, not just in the United States, but broadly. And this has been a really wild year. So all of a sudden, and a classic, super easy example for everyone to just nod their head around is the tariff situation. If you're a consumer company and all of a sudden you don't know if there's going to be tariffs or there are going to be tariffs, but they're not here yet, what do you do with your pricing? What do you do with your supply chain? These are issues that required immediate expertise and a pretty strong strategic pivot, right? Some companies handle that themselves. Others simply don't have the bandwidth and they need someone else to come in and be that expert. So handling the unexpected in a year like this year is one thing that has really emerged. A second thing, which is kind of the first cousin to that, Matt, is the idea that we are going to hold. We're buying an option. We are buying an option. We don't know yet if we're going to launch that product, divest that division, make that big AI hire. We don't know yet if we're going to do it. But while we're waiting, can we move the ball down the field a little bit? And that sort of maintaining momentum while waiting for clarity has just completely supercharged the need for independent solutions, for temporary but high level, call them interim executives, call it interim leadership, call them consulting gigs. You can pick your nouns, but it's the idea that we need to inject experience into the team in order to move that ball down the field to a better position for when we do make the big decisions that lead to traditional hiring. So those are two reasons that make 2025 really distinctive and are sort of accelerating the demand for the high-end independent talent economy. I have other things to say, but I'm going to pause there, see if that resonates.
So I actually had not thought about the latter of what you said. And the way I would describe it is the ability to hold yet validate. Now, here's what to me is very interesting. So, I started in Silicon Valley and then went to Microsoft. So I've seen all these different types of environments. And it's always just blown my mind when looking at the incentive structure within large companies where risk aversion generally takes over typical startup principles. And so In a startup, if we can't adjust, we die tomorrow, right? And that just enables a lot of things to happen that in a large company are totally antithetical to what they're supposed to do, right? And I think this idea of validating just usually doesn't exist in a large company. Yet, when really embracing a flexible workforce, startups have always been doing this. It's just that they weren't out there yelling, look, we have a flexible workforce, yada, yada, yada. They were saying things like, we have agile, right? And we have more of a lean startup mindset. But to your point, and this is where large companies have such an advantage in my eyes, they have these crazy things called budgets and distribution channels. And what does startups not have? Time. So I can't wait for 12 months to sit something out. I need to be making revenue like this. Yet at Microsoft and at these large companies, yeah, I might have even something like $100 million that it's better to invest in something that's variable cost and we can validate something before I fully dive in. And the equivalent I'll use is like, do you want the Zuck Meta $100 million hire, or do you want the $100 million validation to figure out who you should hire? So I love that last point you bring out. Now, let me even get deeper and let me add a caveat to our listeners that y'all have probably the best data out there on what is actually happening, meaning what is the percentage increase in demand from these companies? What exactly are they looking for? Meaning what skill sets? The data you all have in your recent report, it's incredible. So, okay, let's go deeper into the demand and tell us a little bit about what your research says.
I'm happy to do that. And I'm happy to direct people to the report to see all the different cuts on it. It's really, I mean, the top line is there's been over a 300% increase in demand for formal interim executives, think C-suite level executives, since 2020 for us. And they may not be playing a C-suite role. They may actually be doing a special project. So, here's a very simple example. You're a private equity backed portfolio company. You're approaching an IPO. You've got a CFO who's doing a perfectly good job at the normal stuff, but has never actually done the IPO or has never been through that experience. You bring in an experienced CFO to specifically projectize that piece of work and take it on, right? So the growth in how companies are using independent executives has been fascinating. And the fastest areas of growth we've seen have been in the CFO space. But I would not focus too much on that, because what we're also seeing across the board is just how incredibly broad the demand is and the need for a solution provider who can actually be broad. I always say to clients, this is not an inventory model. This is not a staffing model where we have X number of people and we're trying to deploy them. This is a listening model where we are like, okay, what is your problem and who can we bring in to help with that problem? And how do we structure a role? What do we call that role? And how do you onboard them into the organization to be helpful? So recently in Europe, we have put in place an interim head of quality for a very large global pharmaceutical company where they have a remediation issue that needs addressing right away. And they need this incredible expertise. Would I have said to you, oh, we're doing interim C-suite level quality executives for major multinationals as a growth area? No, this was out of, sort of left field, but a situation where they could not wait to make a permanent hire, and they will need to make a permanent hire. But in the meantime, they need to get started on some pretty significant changes to their quality processes.
Everyone, real quick, I want to talk about the risk that is involved with an independent workforce. No matter where you are, whether it's the US, whether it's Brazil, whether it's the EU, whether it's London, there is risk in how you classify and how you work with individuals. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as just paying someone. The classification, the actual collaboration, the contracts, the payments, everything is intertwined and must be connected in a way that doesn't get you in trouble with the tax authorities, regulatory authorities, and even potentially class action lawsuits. There are numerous examples of this. Just search classification lawsuit on wherever you want to use, and you'll get plenty. Which is why today's sponsor, Greenlight.ai, is the modern EOR, modern compliance solution for the modern workforce. There's 4 things that we want to call out when hiring an independent worker that you need. And that is, you need to onboard, you need to classify, you need to send payments, and you need to manage this global workforce. It's more than just one person, and Greenlight has all of that covered. All right, I want you to head over to greenlight.ai and tell them Human Cloud sent you. Yeah, that is fascinating. And one of the questions that actually jumps out in my mind to relate to this is, what are you seeing from clients that are successful? And this is where you have 20 years of seeing this, but also the scale and the volume that nobody else does. Let me throw we just had our network call, and part of it was, you probably saw that stat of like 95% of AI pilots are not working. Now, we had an expert who built out, one of the largest companies, their freelance program. And what he said was, if you don't invest in the muscle, it doesn't matter if you invest in the tool. Now, what you and I both know, in being in this for so long, is it's not as simple as being like, hey, here's an open marketplace. You can log in, post a job, and then there's a perfect person in 2 minutes, right? Like, and this is not like Uber, where I can just push a button and all of a sudden get to point A. So what have you seen work in the most successful clients? Are they, I'll leave it as broad as that.
Well, I'm going to tell a short story to get to the answer on that, Matt, because the topic of AI right now in the last year has been really fascinating to watch all by itself. A year and a half ago, we were being approached all the time for AI experts who could help with sort of stage 0 strategy on AI. But the next thing that happened is companies started trying to create an AI officer role. And it's really interesting. And at Heidrick, we do a lot of advising about this in the AI officer role. Not every company is ready for an AI officer role. They can be very expensive. We've seen in the last month, the first $1 billion pay packages being offered to some AI folks. But what we know from our world is that, first of all, there's a very incredibly exciting pool of AI talent that will never take a corporate role. I mean, literally, they will say to you, I will not take it. It would kill me. I can't operate in that environment. I need to be much more engaged in the world and working on different projects. So that's a set of AI talent that should be looked at and respected for changing and saying there's 6 months here, there's 6 months there, because that's how they want to work and develop. But more importantly, what we're seeing is that clients are backing away in some cases from those big hires and realizing that this is a transformation that affects every aspect of their business. And so rather than localizing all of those responsibilities in a single hire, they're now, I'm going to use this word again, projectizing. They're saying, we have 5 or 6 incredible projects that we need to move to both demonstrate and learn how we're going to piece together the changes that are happening as a result of AI. And so we have one client that is a large, let's call it a gaming company and a hospitality company. So think casinos, right? Where after having tried an AI officer, backed away from it and said, no, what we really want to do is undertake projects that prove how powerful and how quickly we as a company can absorb AI. And so the first project was focused very explicitly on a particular problem, which is, how do we use these spaces more effectively in off cycles and off seasons when our client base is normally not full? So how do we increase our utilization of our facilities in this period? And we crafted a marketing project with an incredible AI expert who did a ton of machine learning based on all the data that this client could provide. And this was a project-based solution using very high-level expertise. So back to your question, what are the key factors for success in clients? And it is, and this goes in the direction of what I was talking about earlier, the future leadership liquidity is about being able to recognize that in order to solve the long-term problems, you have to very quickly and with a lot of agility, tackle short-term things in bursts and, and bring a lot more of that fail fast entrepreneurial kind of sort of thinking and process into the business. So that's where the demand is going now. The demand is not about what, it's about why. It's about the speed of business today requires a level of agility and adjustability that you can't accomplish with solo hire, long-term permanent hiring alone. Of course, you still have to do that, but you can't accomplish it with long-term hiring alone.
Now, it actually makes the leadership liquidity aspect tangible in terms of my startup kind of muscles. Just tell me, well, yeah, let me fail as fast as possible. One of my favorite startup analogies is imagine you have 100 boxes, right? And 100 boxes. And the goal is, okay, find that one ball. Well, usually the corporation will say, all right, let's optimize efficiency to get that one, right? And let's spend 6 to 12 months planning to get that one. Well, the startup founder goes, all right, flip it, and is trying to fail as fast as possible because the quicker they can fail, the quicker they can get to that, the prize. And so when I hear leadership liquidity, it actually now is tangible in terms of, oh, okay, it's the ability to fail fast, efficiently, and even with no strings, right? Because failing with someone that costs $1 billion as your AI leader, good luck getting rid of them. We both know that's going to be painful, long, and just really rough. But it brings up another question that I had, which is related to the blending of, okay, so the full-time workforce, I think we both agree it's not going away. I know we both agree that the flexible workforce and the interim and independent workforce, that's only going to rise. But how do these two intersect? Do you see, and one of the funny questions I too have as well, Sandra, is how does it intersect with what already exists? Meaning these large companies, they have procurement departments, they have contingent offices, we have these VMSs, MSPs. There's all these things that would say, oh yeah, we handle external flexible talent. And you and I both kind of know, well, no, it's not that simple to have one answer. But so how do you see the intersection of full-time talent with flexible talent and everything else in between?
Well, if we keep it focused on, let's call it leadership level, right? And so let's think about it in the sort of framework of a Heidrick Struggles and a BTG, a business talent group kind of world. And the world doesn't have great language around this yet. Like, how do we distinguish this executive critical talent tier from many other important segments of the talent universe, right? I'm in here, I'll say, you can't have a pharma company without amazing bench scientists, right? They are critical talent. So I'm not trying to make one better than another, but in the business world where Heidrick Struggles and Business Talent Group works, it is, for lack of a better word, we call it kind of executive tier talent. In major corporations, that might be kind of senior director and up, and they're primarily in the business sphere. They may be technology leaders, but not the technologists, right? That kind of thing. So I think it's important to sort of try and define that. And the blending has to start. I mean, we see it happening now. And I think this is the future. Heidrick is doubling down on the concept of leadership assurance. What is leadership assurance? If you think about quality assurance, kind of take that mentality and bring it to leadership assurance. How do you make sure that you reliably have the right leaders at the right moments on the right issues and opportunities for the business, right? And that idea of leadership assurance is something that needs to be understood and embraced by senior leadership and a senior HR leadership. That you can't just do, for example, succession planning once every 5 years and do it only for, I think our research shows that most major corporations only do succession planning for about 5 roles. I mean, our point of view is that's very old world. You have to have a broader view of the critical leaders in your business and a plan not only for their permanent jobs, but how you would use this more liquid or variable leadership resource to do two things. One is to sort of facilitate quicker change. And the second is, how do you use it to bolster the team that you already have? So that I'll just stop there for a second, because one of the things that I think is broadly acknowledged, and Matt, you probably agree with this, is that many, many leadership mandates keep getting bigger and bigger, and these jobs are almost impossible. So sometimes using this kind of talent to bolster, not to replace, not to be an interim in the sense of, oh, we're waiting for that permanent hire, but just to give the chief marketing officer literally an extra brain and pair of hands for a very rough period that you're about to go through. Or transformation leaders, you know, you need a huge team to do that. You might have 90% of it in-house, but how do you keep the person who's leading all the HR transformation work streams sane during this period? Well, maybe you can clone them and give them a second one for a period of time. So anyhow, that's a bit of a long answer again. Sorry,
Yeah.
Matt, but I think we're at the beginning of reframing the question about the blending of this at the high levels requires a different kind of thinking, and the not thinking either or, but thinking both and.
Yeah, I would add too, I think, there was a lot of the terms can be tough. There's been so many terms. I think, when did Dan Pink come out with Free Agent Nation? I think that was like in 2003.
Yep.
It was like Free Agent Nation, then liquid workforce, then gig economy, and we've kind of seen all of them, but the core principles have stayed the same. And I think the core principle is flexibility, because I think it also comes back to, like, you don't care if someone's full-time or freelance or independent contractor. You really care, to your point. Is this the right person at the right time working on the right problem? And, a flexible contract has no frills, has no strings. But there's this one thing I want to bring up that to me, I think assures what you're talking about and adds on to exactly what you're hitting on. And I do think that there is this leadership recalibration. Now, I'm not saying that the individual leader is changing. I'm saying that the capabilities that this leader has can change. And part of these capabilities are the fact that if you look at, I'm going to say my generation, only because I think there's a really big gap between my boss and myself back, when I was in corporate. Now, myself grew up in this world where anything that you needed was not at the library. It was simply just by searching it on my phone, right? And that created this crazy, both lazy, but also abundance mindset when I got into the workplace, where it was, okay, I need an answer on that. It seems tougher than a Google search. All right, I can just hire this person in less than 5 days and they'll work to get the answer, not exactly to have the job. And I'll never forget, Sandra, when it turned into a, hey, what do you want discussion? Do you want money, headcount, nice office? And I remember thinking in my head, like, why would I want a headcount? This does not make sense to me. Why would I want 100 people looking up, asking me, when I can have 5 people telling me what the answer could be and just going off and doing it? So I think there is this leadership recalibration where usually the independent workforce is, one, they're incented more, I believe, than, I'm just going to say, execution roles that are full time. 2, they upskill more. So the data is really clear that upskilling is higher when someone is independent than if they're full time. And 3, there's like no risk, right? So if it doesn't work, no harm, no foul. That's been built into, the investment I made at first. I don't have to worry about 6 months and severance and all that kind of stuff. So I totally hear what you're saying from an aspect of, this is a recalibration of what leaders can do to accomplish these massive, massive mandates. And I mean, let me just be super blunt, Sandra. The level of pressure that leaders now have, especially when they look to their left, they look to their right, they see a layoff happening, and they're thinking, is this going to be me? Oh no, I better over deliver on this massive mandate, right? It's like, I will do anything that gives me the tools to actually meet these expectations. Now, what would you say, getting into your best leader's shoes? What do you see the best BTG customers and leaders doing? Are they just saying, BTG, please handle this all for me? Are they, becoming AI experts overnight? What would you say are some characteristics right now of your best leaders?
So let me just double tap on a couple of things that you just said for a second. And I'm actually dying to know, Matt, if you had to guess, what is the word that's going to emerge that is the new catchphrase besides free agent nation? Do you have one? You have a bet? You want to make a bet here now?
I will gladly make a bet, Sandra. I think flexible talent, but I'm so biased, right? Because that's what
Yeah.
we use. And I'll caveat this by saying we use the term human cloud to say, hey, this is the technology infrastructure, and anything like it's kind of just like a corporate catch where it's like, we can't get in trouble if we call it human cloud because, man, it's just technology. I'm going to go with flexible talent, but what are you going to say?
I'm currently stuck on leadership, the leadership dimension, and that leadership assurance requires foreplanning, development, and liquidity. Like, I think those things go together. I do love the concept of a recalibration. And I think two of the other areas that the world needs to work on to fully realize the value of this concept that we're talking about, this flexible concept that we're talking about, are, first of all, culture, and secondly, compensation models. And both of those, we've spent 20 years really teaching the world how much culture matters inside organizations and the culture of engagement. And that's the top question that we get from clients. Well, when we use these senior leaders, how does it affect our culture? And my answer to them is, well, how do you want it to affect their culture? Do you want it to change it, or do you not want it to change it? And there are ways in which we can put our fingers on the scale around that. But I think we've gotten, and my personal point of view is we've gotten a little bit too, culture is so sacred we can't mess with it. And in fact, we are messing with it. We're messing with it all the time just by living in the world that we're living in, right? So, but comp models, I think, are the next thing that we'll have to ultimately tackle to be more creative and allow a sitting executive to have more latitude around how they're incenting more agility in their organizations, period, whether or not they're using external leaders to help do that.
That is such a fascinating. So, I mean, what I love is that you listeners out there, we're not telling you the answer. So you better go reach out to Sandra ASAP and schedule at the least an executive briefing to hit on this. Cause I think that is such a crucial detail, is the comp structures. But my last question for you is I'm going to keep it very broad intentionally for you. Where are things going in the future? And what does every single leader need to know before they close this podcast?
Boy, you're looking for a soundbite here. I will say, look, this genie is not going back in the bottle. And one of the things that's extraordinary to me is, as actually 20 years into this, how many smart, successful business leaders look at me when we meet and say, oh my God, what a fascinating concept. I've never thought about this before. I've never heard of it before. I'm incredulous after 25 years of this happening in the world and having the percentage of, let's just talk about Americans who are now earning their living in the freelance world, growing and growing and growing to the point that it's studied by the Department of Labor. And yet most companies still don't understand that it exists. So I think what's going to happen in the future is that for major corporations, HR leaders are going to have to open their eyes. And just like they are inheriting AI, they're going to have to inherit the workforce of the future in a really new way. What they were doing 10 years ago in 2015 was kindergarten. We have to inherit it in a very new way. And this becomes, if they have to figure out how to use agentic management in their companies, and AI that is a topic that is landing on HR leaders right now. They should similarly be figuring out how to use leadership that is temporary, external leadership, as part of the tool of sort of painting the future for their company. So major corporations, my prediction is that between HR and strategy function, they are going to inherit the future of work as defined by AI, and they should be adding on as defined by the massive changes in the workforce that include what we're talking about today, this flexible side. On the smaller mid-cap size, and let's just call it private equity-backed situation, I think they're going to realize very quickly that they're going to run out of talent options, that there just aren't enough, that leadership supply is incredibly tight for these businesses that are going through rapid change. And there just aren't enough CFOs in the world who are able to take a company private and then public and then merge and then work in a private equity environment. And so they're just going to need to get more creative about projectizing the execution of their value creation thesis and not rely simply on making a CEO hire and a CFO hire and sort of pushing on them. So those are my predictions. I don't know. What do you think?
You called out the soundbite and then made the soundbite. Usually you're supposed to go, oh, okay, you're looking for the soundbite, not giving it to you. But no, you nailed the soundbite, Sandra, which now the last most important question is, where can our listeners find you and BTG?
Well, you can find me at either businesstalentgroup.com or you can find me at Heidrick Struggles.
I love it. Sandra, this was well worth the wait, way more than expected. This was incredible. We will talk to you soon, and thank you so much for hopping on.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Matt.